Hi, welcome back. We're now moving on to the third element in public narrative, namely the story of now. And by the end of this video, you will see a demonstration of how it all comes together in the linked story of self, us, now. Thank you for hanging in with us this far. So, the story of now. I think this quote really captures, this quote from MLK, really captures kind of the urgent drama, if you will, that we're hoping you encompass in the story of now. The idea that we're faced with the fact that tomorrow is today and that we're confronted with the fierce urgency of now. The phrase that he used in the I Have a Dream speech, which was actually titled The Fierce Urgency of Now. So it's this idea that the present moment needs to be defined, both for the urgent moment that it is, but for the also for the hopeful possibility that can be presented in the face of this urgency. So it is what I would call a bold expression of the how. So here, if you remember when we talked about what public narrative is, it's the idea that you activate the head and the heart to move the hands, to motivate action. I want to invite you back up into your head, right, to narrate the how, but it's not just logical, somewhat depressing statistics. It's a very realistic description, perhaps, of what the challenge is, but told in a way that is also illustrates the leader's call to action to deliver, to help the people find their way to the promised land, if you will. So here are the elements of a linked public narrative, but we're going to be focusing on the story of now. As you recall, the story of self asks us to think of a time when we ourselves were called to accept responsibility under conditions of uncertainty. Why? How did we respond? What moved us to take action? And what did we learn about ourselves, right? What was the outcome? We asked you to frame that in a moment of challenge, choice, outcome. Then we asked you to think about the people whom you want to activate to join you in taking action. What are those stories? What are their stories? What are the interests and values that you can illustrate in their stories? And what is the common source of hope that brings all of you the conclusion that the problem is solvable and worth solving? Then we get to the story of now, the description of this intolerable, urgent challenge that you all as a people are being called to address. And what is the specific next step that you're asking people to take? I like this structure as a way of illustrating what I mean by drafting the story of now. Imagine that you are at the precipice of a great chasm and that you are standing alongside your people, and that on this current side of the chasm represents this world as it is, this nightmare, this urgent challenge that you're seeking to address. And the other side of the chasm is the world as it should be. It's the way the world would look different if your initiative were successful. And the bridge is the thing that you're asking them to do, to join you in doing, to take that next faithful step from getting across that chasm. And I would like to say that the gulf between the two places is what happens if no action is taken. So as you think about structuring your story of now, think about what happens if we do nothing? What happens if nothing changes? I'm sure, because I've heard your value propositions, that you have a lot to fill the page around that. But there's another question that a leader needs to take up in the face of this is, what happens if we're successful? What happens if actually the dream of ventures comes true? What does the world look like? This is more poetry than prose. It is a chance for you to really paint a picture of this beautiful reality that you all are working so hard to make real by being super specific around the next faithful step. Because those series of commitments that holds that snowflake together, that that is what ultimately gets you to action. So you can mobilize all of the resources inherent in your community and deploy them only if you get the commitment from your people to actually act in the service of your aim. So how might you ask for a commitment? What would make for something that I would call a strong ask? First of all, you have to state why it's critical, to paint a picture of what happens if you do nothing, paint a picture of what happens if you take action, and articulate a very specific action that you are asking someone to do. Something specific. It could be come to a meeting on Tuesday. It could be vote in a particular way. It could be sign a charter. It could be come to an action. But it always involves moving from the really broad to the very, very particular. So your worksheets, and I'm sorry, once again, I don't have the page number on the slide, but your worksheets will help you develop your story of now. I've already described the questions that we want you to answer in the story of now. And then we're going to be asking you to put it all together, to take your story of self, your story of us, the people in your community, those vignettes, and your story of now, and distill that into one story. And I'd like to suggest that that story is no more than 3 to 5 minutes long. And the way to craft it is to start from the place of your ask. So rather than go back to, I could tell you the story of my 7th grade basketball team and my experience playing basketball as a kid who was at that time 5'1", but that would not be the story that's relevant to what I'm going to be asking you to do in my example. So you start with what you are asking people to do. You think back to who your people are, the story of us, the things that indicate to you that these people are the right people to join you in taking this action together, and then you drill back to your story of self. Pedja's example did just that. Pedja was charged with the idea of, I need to let these folks and ventures understand why I am in this. He started with one story associated with his entree into public health when he thought he was meant to be a doctor in the traditional sense of the word. And then he drilled down even further to this idea that he associated his work with saving his family. So start with your ask, move down to your story of us, and then your story of self. And then when you're telling your story, it's sort of the opposite. You'll start with your story of self, you'll move to your story of us, and then you'll go on to your story of now with your clear ask. So again, in a workshop setting, you would imagine yourself, again, gathering into the same groups, sharing the link story, getting the 3 minutes per person, 2 minutes of coaching, then sharing them, then debriefing it with a wider group. And again, I really encourage you to think and use the agendas that we have in the guide. This is an incredibly rich exercise for building solidarity among your team and also really helping them develop this as a leadership practice. And with that, I will be narrating my example, and then you will be, in our next video on coaching, hear Pedja coaching me. So thank you. Hi, my name is Ella Auchincloss, and this is my story of self, us, and now. I grew up in West Texas along the New Mexico border. My parents, Lupe and Roger, struggled hard to make a good life for my brother Danny and myself. They sent us to the best schools they could afford. I was a smart kid, and I had a hard time finding peers. I lived in my books, and I remember being teased by the cool girls for using big words. Don't get me wrong, I was a fun-loving girl, but I really wanted to be valued for my smarts. And I wanted to be taken seriously, especially by my teachers, these beautiful, ultra-contemporary Roman Catholic nuns who nurtured my love for learning and helped me turn away from the pressures of being an awkward teenage girl. My parents wanted more for me too. So when I announced that I had applied and gotten into some private East Coast colleges. My parents gulped, sacrificed, and went into debt, but they sent me. And there I found a peer group that challenged my thinking in so many ways, and I had to work really hard to keep up. But I acquired the education that really helped my brain become my prized possession. And I believed that facts and the knowledge about how to apply them could save the world. So after an early career on Wall Street, I pivoted toward social entrepreneurship, hoping to create an organization that would reimagine how volunteers could be activated to greater effect in their faith communities. And I went to places like Harvard and MIT to look for the perfect academic framework for how to bring people together around a common goal. And I really did my homework. And I authored a very well-written concept paper that I shopped around to people that I thought would fund me and help me. And I got nowhere. Then I met someone who asked me a very simple question. She asked, "Why does this matter to you so much?" And I had never thought about that question. But in thinking about it, I realized I think she needs to know why in order to decide whether or not she wants to help me out. So once I got clear on that question of why this mattered to me, I went back to her and I shared why. And then she offered me the coaching and the mentorship that I needed to redraft my strategy. Well, this experience shifted my search for the perfect framework and led me to Marshall Ganz. And while yes, he was at Harvard, you can imagine the irony that I felt when he told me that his work was gleaned from working with the Mexican farm workers of Texas, New Mexico, and California, people who looked just like me and who spoke Spanish just like my grandmother, and that he was inspired by them and their use of Roman Catholic devotional practices. Through Marshall, I met a succession of colleagues that would help me get out of my head and into my heart to fully express my deep desire for seeing leaders like all of you succeed in the face of huge odds. I started and am now leading an organization that is serving the Episcopal Church in Eastern Massachusetts and nationally. And I learned from colleagues like Peja Stojcic, whose experience as an activist and a physician informed his unique vocation as a healer of health systems using these tools. I've been inspired by Laura Landy from the Rippel Foundation, whose entire countenance changes when she talks about the urgency of the time we're in now and the opportunity presented to us by the work that you all are doing in Ventures. And I've watched Jane and Bobby and Matt and Sherry and Ruth and so many others sitting around tables right back here in these Rippel offices, Rethink Health offices, trying to reimagine the tools and everything that they know about transformation to help you do this incredibly dangerous, courageous, and radical thing of changing the status quo from the current mess that it is towards a system that works for everyone. I've listened to your values propositions and I've reviewed your presentations, and they're smart and very well developed. Yet, if I'm to be totally honest with you, there's a fairly big piece missing out of all of them, namely you, your story. The people that you need to bring alongside you, they need a lot more than facts and figures tucked into a tidy presentation to achieve the breakthrough action that this project promises. These people need to believe that you can help them get there. So my call to action is for those of you who are wondering if this practice can really help amplify your aims. I ask that you suspend your doubt and try it. Invite your health value team to a retreat and engage in these questions with them. Practice your public narrative with them until all of you feel comfortable sharing it with others. And do this before October 31st. I hope that's specific enough, and I hope that you will take seriously this leadership practice and join me in making it a lifelong practice. Thank you.